Live on Live.
Pauline Bandelier is an independent journalist who has lived in the USA, the UK and China. She's worked with French in various publications. She's been a regular contributor right here to RFI, to English and French programs. And in 2016, Pauline spent 2 months on board the rescue ship SOS Méditerranee, the Aquarius, collecting testimonies of migrants who had survived the ordeal of the dangerous sea crossing. She's also spent time observing migrant experiences here in France over the last few years. Now, these encounters became the basis of a book called Paroles de Migrants, Words of Migrants, which is published by Hugo Doc and released today, the 4th of April, in French. She joins me now in the studio. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you.
Now, the book that you're releasing today, Paroles de Migrants, is only in French for the moment, but it's going to be coming out in English, we hope.
Yeah,
soon.
hopefully soon, yes.
But it doesn't stop us from talking about the very important subject matter that you've put together from this extraordinary experience you've had. I just wanted to start firstly with the book cover. Because it shows a man wearing one of those emergency blankets, which is a very bright, shiny material, and he's looking out to sea. And it's an image that we see so much these days in the media, either with migrants or with natural catastrophes, disasters and so on. And I wanted to know, because I'm sure that there's a very strong reason why you chose this image. Is it hope or is it disaster for you?
Well, I think
or a
it's
mix.
I think it's both. I think it's definitely an overwhelming sense of relief for the people who come on board when they're rescued, and it's a very intense emotion for them and for us, just to feel that they just come out of like hell, you know, in Libya, and also of the terrible anguish of dying at sea. So there's definitely a sense of hope, but there's also something very sad about it, is that you just realize when you talk with them what they just went through, and that there are many more people who are still out there in Libya and experiencing the same kind of hell.
Mm. What motivated you personally to embark on the Aquarius and actually be with the crew and be with the migrants as they were being rescued in the Mediterranean?
Well, I think at the time, you know, I had met several migrants, refugees in Paris. I remember I'd met one Afghan actor who had just escaped from Afghanistan because he was threatened by the Taliban, and his administrative situation was very complicated. And he was just experiencing a lot of feeling of, alienation and misunderstanding. And I had talked to different, people who were living on the street. And so when I saw this opportunity, I was just really interested to learn more about the situation at sea.
What was the interaction like with the crew and on board? And there was people from Médecins du Monde, for example, who were there, and you wrote a kind of a logbook for them of the experiences. But what was it like interacting with them and also with the migrants they were rescuing? What were the difficulties, perhaps?
Well, there were, a lot of very different people who were there on that boat. So you talked about the crew. So there was the crew of the ship who was hired, and this crew in and of itself was very international because there were like Russian captains, there were like people from the Philippines, people from Ghana. And so all of these people were touched in very different ways. You know, people from Africa were touched because there were a lot of Africans being rescued, and people from Russia, some of them were a little tough at the start, but then I think everyone was changed and was touched by this experience. And then the interaction with people from SOS Méditerranee also was very interesting, because actually some of the people who were doing the rescue were themselves refugees who had already found refuge in Germany. There was a Syrian refugee, 2 Syrian refugees, and then there were very young seamen from France who had just never experienced anything like that. And so I think we're just really bound together by this amazing experience.
Were people reasonably willing to talk to you after all this trauma and anxiety that they had been feeling? Did they open up to you fairly easily?
Well, it really depends. I think it depends, on the personality of every individual. It also depends on what people had just experienced. I found that sometimes it was harder for women to talk because some of them had experienced some very traumatizing and shameful things, whereas maybe in most cases, men were more open, but that's, that also depends on every individual. But I felt that in many cases, people wanted to talk because they felt like they had just escaped from death. And so, they just felt a need to like open up and talk and let people know what they had just been through.
Now, with the experiences of migrants, you also mentioned speaking to people here in France. So some of the stories that you've collected for the book also come from your experiences, your observations of migrants here in France or refugees. Have there been also some, you've had some stories of unaccompanied minors, for example, who have told you their story and their journey. Tell us a little bit, maybe a couple of examples of those stories.
Sure. So yeah, there are a lot of different testimonies in the book. First, there are people that I met on the Aquarius, and several of them I've been following for like 3 years. So since 2016. So some of them are now in Germany, some are in Italy, some are in France. And then, like you said, I also talked to many unaccompanied minors. Some of them are actually taken in charge by the state. So I met them in some sort of like a foyer, some sort of
hostel or
yes,
a center
where they are accompanied, and then they go to school, they take training. So that's all until they're 18. But for many others, the situation is much more difficult because, when they come to France and they say like they are minors, they actually have to go to the aide sociale à l'enfance. I don't know how you would translate that, but they have to go there and they have to actually prove that they are minors.
And that can be difficult because they don't have maybe paperwork or documents.
Yes, yes. And, the social service say they're overwhelmed. And so in many cases,
they're left to their own devices.
Yes. And so many of these minors end up on the streets or, they are refused by the aide sociale à l'enfance, and then they have to apply to a judge. But in the process, they spend several months, on the street, and some of them are find asylum in actually some ordinary people's home. And so, yeah, it's a very difficult situation at the moment. And I think associations, you must have heard about it, have talked about this problem.
Yes. And have you got, I imagine your book is going to be a combination of some of the sad stories that these people have to tell, but also some uplifting stories. As we mentioned in the beginning, the hope that is there. Some of these people you've been following, have there been uplifting stories for you?
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, I divided the book in several chapters. So it starts with on the Aquarius. And then there's a chapter that talks about why people fled their country. And that's a little bit dark, obviously. And then there's another chapter that talks about the difficulties of waiting, and the sense of despair that people can feel when they don't know what's going to happen to them, when they're waiting for papers or, And then there's one chapter about unaccompanied minors, because it's quite a specific problem. And then the last chapter is about basically life after, and people who have rebuilt their lives and who have found a new home in France, and how do they feel about their country. I think one of the most uplifting story is one of a young Bangladeshi refugee who is now, who was trained as a chef. And he actually last year or this year was in several newspapers because he won the title of like the best apprentice cook, And So it's quite amazing, to see how resilient some of these people are, after everything they've been through.
How can we find out more about your projects? Because I know you have your own website and you have some of the stories that you've written over the last few years for different publications in English and French. Tell us a little bit about your website.
Well, I think it's a good way for to let people know about my work, especially as a freelancer, since I do very different things. And recently, I was just in Argentina for 1 month, and I did things there. And so, I try, to keep it updated. And so I will have to put this interview on the website.
Which is simply your name, paulinebandelier.com.
Yes.
So if you're listening and you would like to find out a little bit more about what Pauline's doing, including the book project that we're talking about today, Paroles de Migrants, which will come out, it's come out in French today and hopefully in English in the future.
Yeah,
as we said. Yeah.
I really hope so, especially as many of the people I interviewed, their first language or their second language is actually English. And
who did you write the book for in the end? Who did you want to publish this for?
Well, I just felt like, when I was on the ship, I was there for almost 3 months. And, I think I shared this feeling with many of the people who were there, but I just felt like, oh my God, people don't know enough of what's actually happening. And because when we hear about migrants in the media, even though there's a lot of talks about migrants in the media, but we don't hear enough about the individual stories, and we don't hear enough that, if we were in the same situation, probably we would have left. And also that, many of these people are actually quite amazing, because if they were able to make it all the way here with everything they had to go through, like cross the desert, cross the sea, it means they must be like so courageous, so resilient. And so maybe they have something to share with us, something that we can learn from them.
Well, thank you very much for being the guest on Paris Live today. It's been wonderful to hear about your book, and I wish you all the best. Do come back again and visit us here at RFI.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Pauline Bandelier, the guest for today's Paris Live segment.